When Warner Brothers and DC announced their upcoming slate of films, many film fans noticed that there were no standalone Batman or Superman films included. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, Superman actor Henry Cavill said the following: "There's plenty of time for individual Superman sequels. He's a tough character to tell. People like the darker vigilante. I think it speaks to the human psyche more easily rather than the godlike being that we can't really understand. Once we have a more expansive universe, we can delve more into the character of Superman and hopefully tell more stories." Christian, what do you make of Cavill's comments?
I dig his comments because and more than just the human psyche, I look at the times as well too. And John, you're a wrestling fan, so I'll equate it to this. Like when the WWE had Hulk Hogan back in the day, who was like the ultimate good guy, and then later on, as the bad era, you got Stone Cold Steve Austin, and people started to responding more to that anti-hero stuff. That's the age that we live in right now. So I think Henry Cavill's comments, as far as that, the darker tone, and eventually we'll get to more Superman movies. Yeah, I kind of understood that when they first announced that Batman v Superman was going to be basically what the movie was going to be about, and everyone was like, "Wait a minute, is that the Man of Steel sequel?" Then no, and it's not, because had it been the Man of Steel sequel, then you're taking away from Superman and really letting him develop more. But I like the idea that you'll see standalone later, and it'll give us time to set up this DCU, which I do think they're doing a pretty good job of. Once we find out what happens in Batman v Superman, but to get this is how we're going to really jumpstart the DCU. I'm all for it. So I really like his comments here, and I think that once you get developed and learn more about Superman, who will be popping into these movies more, then we want to see more of him, because who knows who's going to pop up in this movie, Justice League. We'll want to see more of a standalone Superman movie down the line.
Just for the record, I still say my prayers and eat my vitamins, brother.
So. Of course.
So, like, I actually really like. There's a lot of insight in these comments, actually, and here's what makes them kind of fascinating. The Superman character, he points out, look, Superman's a tough one to do, and he's absolutely right, because there's a little bit of a Hulk element to him. The trouble, as Kevin Feige described it, in approaching a new Hulk movie, or even wanting to attempt to do a new standalone Hulk movie, is what do you do with the Hulk? I mean, the Hulk just took out a horde of invading aliens, practically single-handedly. Yeah, the rest of the Avengers were there, but he was doing just fine on his own, taking out the flying worm and all that kind of stuff. I mean, he can do whatever. With Superman, what do you do with Superman? Who does Superman fight? Like, if you're not, because you can't have a Zod every single movie. Like, oh, there's also another incredible godlike being who can rip the planet apart if he really wanted to, and now Superman's got to fight him, and you do that every time. So it makes for an interesting dilemma, and I think that's what he's pointing out. And I like says, look, once you flesh out this DC universe a little bit more, then more options open up for telling Superman stories. And I think that's the dilemma that Bryan Singer probably faced when he was making Superman Returns. And that's why ultimately in Superman Returns, a movie which failed as a comic book movie, but I actually still got a lot out of the film myself, because it was really more of a character study. It's more about the personal dilemmas that Superman faces rather than the arch enemies that he faces. And I think that's what he was going for, and unfortunately it didn't click with a lot of people. But so I like what he's saying, and it makes sense. And once you flesh out the universe, there'll be more options available to him. So I think he's bang on the money with these comments, Mark.
Yeah, I'm going to give old man Henry some credit, because, I mean, there's so many actors that if you're playing Superman and you're in Man of Steel, you would whine and moan about the fact that, now already we're going to jam Batman and pretty much everybody else in the Justice League into the next movie that we're making. But he's really embracing what's happening here, because he knows how important it is to bring Batman into this world, especially this new darker Batman, like what we talked about on the show yesterday. And Superman going forward, as you bring in more characters into this universe, like what Christian said, it lends itself to more fantastical storytelling where the stakes get elevated. And who's that going to benefit? The guy with the most power. Superman can fly all over the place. He can go off to different planets. So as these stories get bigger and they get and it takes up the entire universe, and not just one guy going against another guy and feeling each other out, once you have other powers involved, that's when Superman is really going to be able to step up. So he's biding his time, and I love the fact that he's on this ride that DC's taking him on, and he's not complaining about his role or how beefy it necessarily is in one movie.
Well, that's the unique situation that Henry Cavill, he's in a great position, because ultimately of what Marvel was able to accomplish with their MCU. And now, because DC is able to do that, he does have all these opportunities now to where Superman ultimately could go. So you're right, with Bryan Singer, that was way before the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So there was only this one standalone movie. Maybe we'll get a second movie out of it. We don't know who we should fight. They didn't really have the way that the audience has responded. Look at what the Avengers has done. Now you can bring everybody, Guardians, now the Guardians has worked and all this. You could do so much now. Like Mark, like you were saying, like eventually once we get 5-6 movies into the DCU, he could be fighting everyone and we'll believe it. And there could be, people can come down to the earth and we'll believe it now because they've set that up. It wouldn't have worked in the Nolan universe, obviously, because it was based in that realism. But in this universe they're setting up, there'll be a lot of opportunities for him to fight people that will go, okay, that's believable.